Thank you, President of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, Ms. Laura Boldrini, Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Gabriele Batan Dragone, Mayor Luigi Brunellaro, President of the Union of Italian Jewish Communities, Mr. Renzo Catania, President of the Jewish Communities of Venice, Mr. Paolo Niate. Not easy. Mr. Simon Shama, easy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be here in Venice today as a representative of Jewish communities around the world. I would like to thank the Italian government, the City of Venice, and the Jewish community for your gracious welcome and for marking this very important event. Most of all, I want to thank you for remembering. It is not easy to recall events from our past that were wrong, but to recall an error in a very public way. I believe this shows courage and strength. And that is something that Jews have always admired in the Italian people, your courage and your strength. But we gather here tonight, we must be honest. The 500th anniversary of the creation of the Jewish ghetto is a complicated affair. On one hand, the creation of a ghetto was a terrible act. It was the first time that an entire community was physically separated because of their religion. The entire concept of the ghetto began here in Venice, but it spread across Europe, and the ghettos became even worse. At its height here in Venice, 5,000 people were confined to a very small, congested space, the size of about 2.5 city blocks. The gates were closed at night and guarded. The people were locked in. This was, in many ways, a prison. An entire people who committed no crime were condemned to prison. And yet, there is also an important story of resilience here in Venice. In spite of this decree, the Jewish community still flourished inside the walls and the locked gates of the ghetto. 5 of the most beautiful synagogues in all of Europe were built here almost immediately. Many of Europe's most important books were published in this ghetto, and commerce flourished. I always find it fascinating that when Jews are singled out and placed in terrible situations, they build synagogues, they study, they write books, they compose music and plays, and they create art. They create, and they create, and they create. There is something else that must be pointed out. The Jews in the ghetto came from all over Italy. They came from Spain and Germany and other parts of Europe. Their only common language was Hebrew. But they all lived together in peace, and they helped each other. That is a story that should be remembered, especially today. Think about this for a moment. Jews were confined to live in a small place. Life must have been very difficult then. I don't think any of us here tonight can really understand what it was like. I certainly can't. I cannot imagine not being able to travel freely. Jewish children were not allowed to play with other children, like other children. But the amazing thing is that people who lived here could still write about places they could not see. They used their imaginations. Artists and musicians created great works from inside their heads. I find this astounding. In spite of the hardships, by the time a Jewish boy was 13, he knew the Torah and the Talmud. when a large percentage of the world's population was still illiterate. Doctors, confined in this tiny space, found ways to heal the sick. Then and now, the prime motivation of Jews was education and charity. Not bitterness, never bitterness, because of who they were. Jews were not defeated by the Venice ghetto, in spite of the effort to isolate them. And even though this was done to separate the two faiths, Jews and Christians, they continued to work together because Jews were not allowed to publish their books within the ghetto. They worked with Christian printers on the outside. Jewish physicians, musicians, and artists found ways to collaborate with the world outside. Jews and Christians developed commercial and architectural projects together. Life continued in spite of the ghetto. It's very important also to remember all of this because of what is happening today in Europe. 500 years after the ghetto and well into the 21st century, we see a resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe once again. A Jewish boy wearing a yarmulke cannot walk safely down the streets of London or Paris or Berlin. Jews again are being murdered only because they're Jewish. Some have even suggested that the Jews should leave Europe altogether. But there is here an important point. If every Jew left Europe tomorrow, that might be sad for Jews, but it would be a tragedy for Europe. That's because for over 1,000 years, Jews have added to every positive aspect of European culture. Jews were a vital part of Europe's art and literature. Jews created commerce and jobs. Jews cured diseases and made life better for all people, Jews, Christians, Muslims, everyone. And for all of this, Jews were often rewarded with prejudice and exclusion. They were vilified, isolated, and in too many cases, they were even killed. Jews have always been tiny in numbers. There are only 15 million Jews today in the world, of over 1 billion Christians, and more than 1 billion Muslims. But the Jewish impact on all things positive is huge. You see this in Israel today. Israel is a tiny country of just 6 million Jews with no great natural resources. And yet, in spite of all these challenges, Israel today produces almost as much technology as the United States or China. Think about that for a minute. 6 million Jews producing nearly as much cutting-edge technology as the United States with 300 million people, or with China with over 1 billion. The entire world benefits from Israel's advances in water use, agriculture, science, and medicine. Yet Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, the only country where women, gay people, and all religions live together. Israel is perhaps the most vilified country on earth, at the UN, in the media, and in universities. This is not just illogical. It is insane, and it's hypocritical, especially in universities. In universities, in a place where the free ideas are essential for learning, there are academic boycotts against scholars who happen to be from Israel. These boycotters say they are just anti-Israel. Let's call it what it really is. It is anti-Semitism. Just like that in the Venice ghetto, Jews show the same resilience today. For 5,000 years, we haven't disappeared, and that's a very good thing, not just for us, but for the entire world. We must be honest. Yes, there was anti-Semitism here in Italy, and at times it was very brutal. Jews were isolated by severe decrees. The darkest hour occurred within my own lifetime, when Italy was allied with Nazi Germany. But today in Italy, where there once was anti-Semitism, the Italian government, the heads of parties, and the institutions are actively fighting anti-Semitism. And we, on behalf of the Jewish people, appreciate this very much. Italy has been very helpful to the World Jewish Congress and with the State of Israel. Since I assumed the presidency of the World Jewish Congress in 2007, our relationship with the Italian government and the Vatican has grown stronger and more positive. The ministers and political leaders here today prove that, and I thank you for your presence tonight. I have been very encouraged in every meeting I've had with Pope Francis. Just last year, Pope Francis told us in a private meeting, and I'm quoting him, "To attack Jews is anti-Semitism, but an outright attack on the state of Israel is also anti-Semitism." The Pope told us, I quote, "There may be political disagreements between governments on political parties, but the state of Israel has every right to exist in safety and prosperity." In my mind, Pope Francis demonstrated the definition of moral courage, especially when too many people are silent about the attacks on Jews throughout Europe and the Middle East. It concerns me greatly that the world is also silent about the slaughter of Christians throughout the Middle East and Africa. Jews learn what happens when the world is silent, and we learn that lesson the hard way. Standing here, we feel the echoes of the past. There were once 5,000 Jews who lived in the ghetto. Today, there are only 500 in all of Venice. But you can still feel the presence of the past when you stand in the ghetto. You feel all the souls that came through that terrible place. You appreciate the difficulties of their lives, and you admire their courage and their contributions. That hasn't changed today. Today, there are only 28,000 Jews in all of Italy, but their contribution is enormous. People like Primo Levi, Eli Toef, Giorgio Bassani, and many, many more have helped make Italy the great country that it is. Jews and Italians are intertwined. We saw the ghetto in the ghetto 500 years ago, just as we see it today. On behalf of the World Jewish Congress, I want to thank you, the Italian people, for remembering this part of your past. Because when you face the past with complete honesty, you actually create a much better future for our children, for your country, and for all people. Mille grazie. Thank you.